We're back at TPC Performance here in Jessup, Maryland. We're about to meet Mike Levitas, the owner, and his latest vehicle that's in the shop here. It's the GT2 RS, known as, to many, King Kong. It's the fastest production Porsche that is out right now, and we're going to get to see sort of underneath the skin of this car, which I don't think a lot of people have seen. So we're going to start and take a look at what he pulled off to do a service. So come on over here. This is the rear bumper cover for a GT2 RS. Now, it's not unusual that you have to pull a bumper cover to service, especially the modern day Porsches. But this one is a little bit more involved, and I'm going to bring Mike in here to tell you a little bit about what it takes to pull the cover off the GT2 RS. So, Mike, good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you, Vu.
I'm going to hand you the mic and just quickly walk through what it takes to take this bumper cover off.
Sure. Really, the bumper cover removal is not so different than any of the 991 version cars, whether it's the Cup car or the 911, just Carrera 2, Carrera 4. There are some exceptions, though, some of which are in some of the clip detail and some of the aero components is different. The clips that are in the top are the same as the original, and this isn't a clip. It's actually a fastener that is in this upper corner. Same as you would find on the normal ones. You would as well have a fastener in the corner by the taillight area. You have 4 fasteners across the back section, which are very similar to the road car as well, and the same on this side. Some of the differences in the cover are really with the bottom section is to do with the under tray and the aero components of that. And you can see where you even have the air outlet of the tray in this area, and for heat extraction as well. These areas here are for the intercooler discharge, which is different than the turbo model. That's an interesting part. This is different than our Cup cars and different than the road cars. This is a carbon component. It's definitely autoclaved and it's been bagged. Really high quality part, and it's in 2 pieces, so it's really acting as a structural member behind the car. It's definitely carrying a load. This is not just for a visual look. It's slightly heavy, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's got it, but it's light because it's carbon. But it's an I-beam, and it's an amazing piece of carbon.
Very cool.
And that is particular to the GT2.
All right, well, let's take a walk over and take a look at the back end of this GT2 RS. As we walk over, we'll see some of the things that he's pulled from the car. These are the exhaust fans at the top in the rear of the vehicle. Here's a cover plate here. Those obviously needed to be pulled off. And then if you turn around here, you'll see not many people get to see this view of a GT2 RS. And what's telling about, I guess when I first saw it was, many people might say that a GT2 RS is a turbo, maybe on steroids and such. But as we look closer and closer to the details of what they've done to a GT2 RS, we're finding that there are definitely motorsport components, heavier duty items that are on this car. And it's not just what might, some people might just say is a tarted up a turbo. So we're going to lift this up and we're going to walk around and show you some of the details of the GT2 RS. So I'll hand it over to Mike again.
Vu, while we have the car down like this, I'll just point out a couple of small things. In order to service this car right now has 1,600 miles, and it was about 1,500 miles on the Nordschleife, and 2 days at Spa. And so we're servicing all the fluids, and in order to change the oil filter, you literally have to remove the bumper cover. You have to remove the airbox assembly, and that's to gain access to the oil filter assembly. So we've already serviced the oil filter, and we do something slightly different so that every time, because now in the service manual it does say to service the engine oil after every track event, not every 10,000 track miles, and we actually modify this snorkel so that you don't have to remove it every time. That way it can just be snapped into place. You still have to remove the carbon fiber component, but it makes it so that you can change the oil often.
So your access is going to be much easier.
Yeah, so rather than doing that horrible remove everybody, get the air box, because it can take, you've got 3-4 hours tied up and tearing down the back of this car. So now we can just take down one section, remove the snorkel, gain access, and then start reassembling the car. You'll see the attention to detail that Porsche has. I mean, everything's got perfect assembly. This peg right here lines up with the chassis to make it more rigid. You can see it's actually, this one's unclipped, but when it's clipped in, it makes it rigid because that intersects with the opening in the deck lid, which is the cold air inlet. And so the attention to detail is just uncanny. So let me put it up in the air and we'll take a look.
Well, before we put it up in the air, I would like to point out something that I've never seen before that you showed me is actually not just the air cleaner itself, but the filter element. Behind me, I have a filter element from, I believe, a 997, and it's a panel filter that most of us are used to seeing in all sorts of cars, especially Porsches. But the filter element in this car, although we don't have this open, we'll probably post a quick picture in the video. There's actually tubular filter elements back here. I believe there's 3 of them.
There are. There's 3 tubes that run horizontally from turbo inlet to turbo inlet. And these are like a fiberglass composite. And what they do is they take out the larger particulates and stop those from being ingested into the cold side of the turbo. Really an ingenious, incredible entry system to the turbo. And you can even see the attention to ductwork. They've left nothing undone on the GT2. This is a pure race car at this point.
All right, well, let's check out the race components that are underneath of this car. When you're talking about turbos, you got to talk about the intercoolers. And I noticed as he was lifting up the car here, the intercooler that is on this GT2 RS, this is stout. This is like real deal, almost like you said, 962. It's not your plastic. It's not, it's to me, a very heavy duty piece for a road going car.
Yeah, it really is, Phil. I mean, the attention to detail is uncanny. From the lightweight construction of everything holding it, there's no metal bracket. It's carbon ductwork. And then even the clamp that's affixing the discharge of the compressor section of the compressor of this intercooler is an O-ring style that is different than the turbo version. And notice the aluminum manifold. Mm-hmm. You won't see that on the standard turbo car. It's a plastic composite, and the core is different as well. This is really a purpose-made intercooler for a race car.
This is what you would see in the motorsports world.
Oh, this is motorsports all the way. This ends in an 80 part number. The compressor bypass valve comes off of the intercooler assembly, and this stops. What this does is this compressor bypass valve, what its job is, every time you're shifting a gear and the throttle plate is opening and closing, the air a high pressure always wants to seek a low pressure, which is the intake valve. When you shut the throttle plate, this high pressure has got to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. Typically, it would go back into the compressor section. That would overheat the air that would come in the next throttle opening. What they do is they bypass the air. It comes back around to the compressor section inlet to stop the heating of the air. Mm. Everything on here is motorsport.
Wow. All right, let's get it back up in the air. All right, we're underneath the vehicle. Oftentimes we're at TPC, we're underneath, and that's what I love about coming over here. When Mike's working on something, he calls us over to see some of the coolest stuff that he's working on, and today is no different. How often do you get to see the bottom of a GT2 RS? And what I'd love for you to do for us, Mike, is just walk through us and see what you've noticed in comparison to a normal turbo.
Well, yes, and the turbo I'm very familiar with because I run the turbo in the Optima series, and everything in this underbelly is really completely different. And really starting with the exhaust manifold is a totally different manifold. The inlet to the turbocharger is much improved. It's a much larger turbine. The turbine cover, and you might get a view also from this side as well. This is it's still a VGT turbo, so the electric motor right here drives the shutter doors, which controls a variable AR, which is the choke, the nozzle velocity for the turbine section. And this is huge in comparison to a 911 turbo, just like major big. This is, you know, pure race car component. Even the discharge, where it's normally a 4-bolt flange, 5-bolt flange, is now just, I mean, that's like 120 millimeter, it might even be 150 millimeter V-band discharge. So there's, the attention to detail is just uncanny in this car. Another piece that's worth noting is the compressor discharge going to the intercooler. On the road car, the 911 turbo, this is about a 52 millimeter, and on this car, this is like 65 millimeters. It's a massive hose. So what that does is it changes the compressor efficiency. And so by changing the exhaust efficiency, you're lowering the crossover pressure between the intake pressure and the exhaust pressure. And then by as well accommodating the compressor discharge, you're improving the compressor efficiency to take advantage of having this huge turbocharger. And it really is. And because it's a VGT turbo, this variable geometry turbine section, the throttle response is just, it's as good as the 911 turbo. As a matter of fact, I believe even better. The throttle plate movement is just matched, just like a motorsport. It's nice and linear, progressive. Any little changes in the throttle doesn't upset the car because of that. And the turbine speed perfectly matches the throttle opening. Really incredible. There's other notable changes as well to this car. Not only in the exhaust manifold, but on the inlet to the turbo. This is probably on the cold side. This is the cold side. And this section here is much improved over the 911 turbo. This is the very, if you can read up in here, I'll get a light. You'll even see they were proud of this component. It says GT2 RS. And the inlet of the compressor section is a very important feature, because anytime you can improve, you can optimize the inlet, you're improving the compressor efficiency. And the efficiency relates to density. So the more efficient the compressor, the more dense the mass air, and therefore the more power you get out of it. This car produces 700 horsepower, and it does it at the same pressure ratio as my 911 turbo that's rated at 560. So it's quite significant. It's mostly done in all these engineering feats. And this side is equally as impressive. This is completely redesigned from the 911 turbo, the inlet components. I mean, you see how large that elbow is? So what it's doing is, as the mass comes in there and it goes into a larger divergent duct, it slows down the mass air so that it walks over the inlet of the compressor at a lower speed. That lower speed increases the efficiency of the compressor section. It's really everything that you would want to do to build a race car, they're doing.
So you read on the forums and such when the GT2 RS was introduced, you know, a lot of people were sort of cynical and saying, you know, they weren't sure that this motor was going to be a true motorsports race motor. What's your answer to that?
Well, I've been racing Porsche cars for too many years to think anything other than this would be a complete motorsport design. And as soon as people were saying that, I was on the list to get a GT2, and I wasn't backing down, because I know if Porsche was building a GT2 for homologation purpose, this car would be a true motorsport car, and it is. And there's no component on this engine or any of the accessories that are anything short of the GT3 Cup car that we race. The upper section is just as impressive, even down to the heat shielding. This is different than the 911 turbo. There's more attention to the heat shields, which you would do for racing application. So that way, you know, the areas around the turbo aren't overheated. And I knew that this would be, and really, we were talking earlier about what would you do if you had a 911 turbo. Could you bring it up to the 911 turbo? Could you bring it up to the GT2 status? I think at this point there's so many components different. It is possible, but it would be it would be much more cost effective to buy a GT2. But there's a lot of cues to be learned off of here.
Very cool. So we know the engine is amazing. I know I've been watching your posts on Facebook. It seems like you had a great father and son time in Germany experiencing this car. But from your posts, I also, came away with how impressed you were with the chassis. So if we could, since we're underneath the car, let's take a look at some of the chassis components.
Yeah, let's. The first thing you really look at when you're under this car, and it's a shame we don't have one of the GT3 Cup cars. Maybe we'll put one up in a moment. But the visual, the upright, the frame members, the crossover member, this is out of the race program. All of the frame members are the same as the race program, where the machining pickup points are slightly altered because of the ride height in the road car versus the race car. But everything on here is from the racing program, right down to the lower control arm. This is really right out of our race car. It's a full Heimball in all the areas, same as the race car. Only difference is it has dust covers, just because it's going to be road going. And the same with the upper bones. All these control arms are all out of the racing program. Every part on here is right out of the race program. So, and I anticipated that to be the case. The one interesting thing, though, that is different, Viv, that I could point out from the race car is the tow rod assembly. This has the really great rear steer that I love on the GT3 road cars. It's actually a really great component, so that the car steers very nice at low speeds, and then it acts like a longer wheelbase at higher speeds to give it more stability. And man, is that apparent when I was at the ring. I mean, this car going over 250 kilometers was like goofy. The car just wants to just keep eating it just eats asphalt. And this is probably the best, without a doubt, the absolute best chassis I've ever been in for a street car. And I think that's every bit as good as my race car. You got to tune the heck out of the race car to get it even better. Look at that component.
Yeah, this is the first time for me to see a carbon fiber chassis bar here, the sway bar, and of course the adjustable mounting points, the uprights as well. This is quite incredible.
Yeah, the drop links are carbon as well. Look at how the drop links are constructed. They're constructed in a way that makes them probably more rigid than if it had an aluminum drop link.
Maybe shine a light so that they can see the drop link.
Yeah.
On this side, I'll take it up here. There you go.
Yeah, the drop link is all carbon. It's a hollow sway bar, and I got to tell you, the rate is, man, is this car hooked up.
The springs. We didn't get to take a look at the springs.
Gotta see.
We got to see the springs on this side.
And the shocks. You can kind of get your...
Now, those are some beefy springs. Those are not your regular 400, 500-pound springs.
No, these are really closer to... I have not put them on the spring dyno and run them through, but just to see the diameter of the wire itself and then the length of it, it does have a large diameter, which I like. It really manages the frequency well, because the frequency of the tire is almost perfectly matched to the chassis. The car is amazing the way it puts down power, and the spring rate's probably I'll bet you it's in the 700-pound rate area. And the same goes in the front end. Also, notice the damper is a electric damper. It's a Bilstein damper. It's a motorsport design. That even has a rod end in the bottom, which they never do on the road car. I can even turn it. Look at that. I didn't even notice that. So there's no compromise in the bottom end of the shock as well. And I believe it also has a solid mount in the top. There's no compromise as far as being a motorsport product.
As I continue to look underneath, I couldn't help but notice the way, the chassis is ribbed. And I know the street-going cars are also ribbed as well, but it just seems to me that this is just a bit more stout than what you would find on a regular street car.
It has the road car really does have a very similar tub. This is very similar to our Cup car in the bottom. I haven't seen too many of just the C2s and paid attention. I know they've got some stiffening ribs, but I know the backbone of these, the Cup car and this C4 type chassis and this turbo chassis, this is, I guess, their wider chassis. This looks like it's an extremely rigid component.
And while we're standing here and I see some more coolers, and can you explain to me what these are?
Well, this side is the different. Actually, I just finished servicing this.
Okay.
This is the gear oil section for the differential. And so this side of the PDK transmission is differential. And the ring and pinion are actually in this section back here where the drive axle comes out. That's the output flange. And this holds, it's about 4 quarts of 75/90. It's quite a bit of oil. It was actually very dirty after 1,500 miles of Nordschleife.
Again, I think that's to build it up so that, when you're running it hard, you have more than enough.
Oh,
it's
unbelievable.
over-engineered.
It was engineered as a motorsport. Even I've got to tell you that when I took delivery of the car, I drove it about, I think it was close to 200 kilometers from Stuttgart to Nürburgring. Mm-hmm. And then I went up to Cologne and met with Lucas Lohr and Jan Sluten. And I used their setup table and we corner weighted it and we checked the ride heights. And we didn't make an adjustment because it was perfect. It was a little better than the way my Cup car was delivered.
Well, as you know, we did a recent video with Brian Sellers and crew where the GT2 RS was put up against a Cup car, and it was amazing. Yes, it was maybe a few seconds slower, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, you really could sip a latte and listen to radio, and you're a few seconds below a Cup car. That's just crazy. Over here we see another cooler, and I believe you mentioned this is for the PDK.
Yes, this is the hydraulic section of the gearbox itself, and even this cooler seems a little larger than my 911 Turbo does. Again, the car is a motorsport application. I would bet you that this driveline assembly, intercoolers, everything, chassis, this will be this is a race car.
All right, well, let's take a trip to the front because we might as well see the front suspension.
Might as well while you're here.
And again, everything just looks over-engineered. Pieces from motorsports for sure. Walk us through it.
Yes, this is literally everything you're looking at is out of the racing program. The upright is the same as what we have on our Cup car. The assemblies are machined in different places to accommodate the ride height, but it's all of the motorsport component. Right down to the lower control arm is the same. It has the shims, just as the motorsport, and it has a solid bushing for the caster setting as well, same as the motorsport. Now the motorsport is slightly offset, but that's only because we run a different camber setting and ride height than we would on a road car. So this has extreme similarities. Don't know if you can see the spring on this one, if you can get a shot up there. But this, even the spring is different than the GT3 for sure. It's a pretty heavy spring rate. Need a light up there? Good. Yeah, you can see by the diameter of the wire, and it's a constant rate. It's a straight spring. It's a linear spring, and it's got the small tender spring or helper spring on the upper part. And a lot of people think that that's used to this. See how the spring in the very top of it has a different rating?
Yep.
And that spring really...
is that what they refer to as the helper spring?
It is, but I really refer to it as the nose of the spring. That really controls when you get on the tire, when you first get into the grip area of the tire, that acts like a little bit of a nose on the spring. It softens the nose up. It's really to accommodate that more than anything else. Same on the back end of the car. It had the same type of spring. Because when we put them on the spring dyno, you can see the nose of the curve is slightly softer when you do that, even though they're almost completely compressed, versus having you know,
It's just
it's a straight spring. Yeah, it has a different signature.
Well, folks, there you go. The bottom, the rear end look of a GT2 RS. Michael, thank you as always. I know you've got a lot of work ahead of you, but for us to be able to come down. Oh, there's more. Okay.
This is now, you won't see this on a cup car.
Oh.
This is RSR stuff.
Yeah.
This, it's got so much aero. Here's an interesting component, Vu, before we sign off. This is different than the cup car for sure. This front nose assembly has way more downforce than my race car. You can see it's got a little bit of rash from the racetrack, but there's so much downforce generated. You see these huge fasteners coming through the front grille area?
Oh, yeah.
That goes from the reinforcement. And that literally, so
That's pushing the whole.
oh my gosh, who knows, at like 250 to 300 kilometers, I don't know what this could be 600 pounds of down. I don't know how much is up here.
Basically tethered to the chassis.
Totally. Or it would collapse. My cup car just has a small little lip here, but it's hugely effective because anybody that's driven a GT3 in anger and has knocked the spoiler off, man, when you come to the next brake zone, you have got to be careful and you don't get the front grip in the tire. But look at the length of this. And then these fasteners are proof that, yeah, that's like a 10 millimeter fastener, 3 of them. Yeah, that one.
Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you so much, Mike. I know you've got a lot more work to do the maintenance on this GT2 RS, but you know, he calls us and, you know, gives us an opportunity to take a look and have a different perspective on these cars. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you next time.